Hello and welcome to IOHR TV. Now today we're at the World Conference on Statelessness in The Hague, which IOHR is the official NGO media partner. Today I'm joined by Carol Batchelor, who is the UNHCR Special Advisor on Statelessness. Carol, good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us today. The initial aim for UNHCR's Belong campaign was to end statelessness by 2024. And given the figures that we've heard here today, that there are around 15 million people who remain stateless globally, can you tell me if you really think the figure for 2024 is realistic?
Anything's doable with sufficient will to do it. And I would say on this particular issue, yes, it can be complicated. It can be sensitive. We've heard today that it can be political. And this is the identity of a state. And we live in a world divided into states. During the early 1990s, when there was dissolution, massive dissolution of state, former Soviet Union, former Czechoslovakia, former Republic of Yugoslavia, we saw that one of the first things that every newly emerging state did was to adopt their nationality law. This is what defines a state. So yes, this is deeply embedded in people's psyche. We see today a lot of commentary on who belongs, who doesn't belong, about those who are the other. And we hear a lot of unfortunate misunderstanding or misrepresentation about who these others are. At the same time, we launched this campaign in 2014. We're now halfway into the campaign. We have seen remarkable steps taken in many locations in the world to try and identify the problem of statelessness. It's hard to solve something, hard to end it if you don't know where it is. So that's a first step. Many states, including in the European context, have adopted statelessness determination procedures to identify who's at risk, who is stateless, and then to bring solutions. We feel we wouldn't have launched this campaign if we didn't think it was doable. In terms of just ending statelessness, it is very, very simple. You give somebody a nationality. It's a legal change in their status.
The situations that cause people to be stateless around the world varies depending on which part of the world you're in. But would you be able to identify some of the major obstacles that stand in the way to ending statelessness globally?
We have two significant challenges. You mentioned the number of 15 million people that has been discussed here today. When we launched the campaign, we were in the ballpark of 10 million people. The reality is that only 1/3 of the states in the world have data on who is stateless on their territory. So if this 15 million comes from 1/3, you can imagine the size, potential size of the problem. We don't know all of the persons who are stateless. We know the severity in the life of an individual who is stateless. We know that they typically can't go to school, they can't get a proper education, that has sort of forward negative ripple effects. They're not able to work, they're not able to get a work permit, they're not able to register the birth of their child, typically they can't marry. You need a document. You need to exist in legal terms in order to marry. I've seen instances where people are not able to bury their loved ones. We need to understand the magnitude of the problem, and that is one of the action points in this campaign, that all states would bring forward data. They would all have a system for identifying stateless people on their territory, and they would share that information, because only with that will we be able to truly end statelessness. Our second greatest challenge is helping everyone concerned, states certainly, but societies, communities. People live. They don't live in states and a sort of global frames. They live in neighborhoods. We can look at a lot of sort of technical, legal, some states in the world use jus soli, so you're born somewhere, you get the nationality. Some use jus sanguinis, you're descended from someone, you get the nationality. And we do have instances where people fall through all of the cracks, there's a problem with birth registration, etc., etc. But a lot of this is sort of technical machinery. It's not the cause of statelessness necessarily, it's a kind of result of oversights.
There are many people who know and understand exactly what statelessness is, and still there are millions of people around the globe who've never heard of the word and don't even know what it means. What recommendations do you have to increase awareness of this real problem of statelessness? What do we need to do to get the word out there to better educate the general public?
We're not even sure that it's 15 million. As I mentioned earlier, it's only 1/3 of states in the world that we have data for. So how can we help to educate and inform? I think a gathering like the one we're having this week is absolutely fundamental. It's the state that determines who has nationality of the state. That's the only system we have in the world today. We live in a world composed of states. States give or don't their nationality. But for states to understand who should get that nationality, who is in the community, who has a contribution, who has a connection to that country. If the person has been born on their territory, has lived all their lives there, or perhaps has been born abroad to a mother who's not able to convey her nationality because she's a woman, and the father, we don't know where he is, maybe this happens frequently. In the Syria context, the father has been killed in conflict or has disappeared, and the mother is not able to pass her nationality to her child. So I think what we can do to help raise awareness is exactly what's taking place here this week. It's easy to say that, well, the state is to blame. They should have given nationality, they should know who's on their territory, etc., etc. But for many states, that's very difficult. They may ask another state, the child says that they were born in your country, do they have your nationality? And that state never replies. We need civil society, we need communities, we need neighborhoods. Each one of us can do to raise awareness of who's stateless.
Do you think if the UN declared an international day for the stateless, that this would help?
That's been done for a number of other topics. We have a World Refugee Day. The entire world is looking at what does it mean to be a refugee? How do people end up in these circumstances? And what should we do to prevent that? It could happen to any one of us. And the same could be said about statelessness. When we saw these massive dissolutions in the early 90s, although that's a fairly regular phenomenon, but in the early 90s, huge portions of the world changing the legal identity of the state. I saw many instances in which the person didn't move. The borders moved around the person didn't move at all. But from one day to the next, they went from being a citizen of the former Soviet Union, former Yugoslavia, former Czechoslovakia, to being a stateless person. Having a day where we raise awareness, we focus our attention, we allow stateless people or formerly stateless people to speak for themselves, to say this is what my experience was, and here's the advice and wisdom I can share about how to avoid that for other people.
In a presentation that you made to UNHCR Standing Committee, you identified statelessness as both the root cause and the consequence of displacement. Just this month, the new UNHCR report said that global displacement numbers are now a record high level, staggering 70.8 million people fleeing war, persecution and conflict, and that were the figures in 2018. Tell me, what does this mean in the fight against statelessness?
We do see, and this is actually one of the key reasons why the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, why we were given that accountability to not only look at the situation of refugees, but also a responsibility in relation to statelessness, because very often the two overlap. We have instances in the world today where huge numbers of people have been displaced, have had to flee their country, have become refugees. And one of the root elements for that, statelessness is a little bit collapsing into a single word, a series of things that can be problematic for an individual. So statelessness, all of that describes somebody who's on the outside. And if that is a deliberate act of discrimination and exclusion, it may end up being a ripple effect to large-scale displacement. Sometimes originally as internally displaced, and then people cross borders, they become refugees. We, as the refugee agency, are always looking for solutions. And most refugees in the world, when asked, what would you like to do, they want to go home. But how can you ask somebody to go home when it never was home? The overlap between forced displacement and refugee flows and statelessness is absolutely clear. And not being able to solve the problem of statelessness means not only prolonged exclusion for those people, but prolonged refugee situations, which have their own challenges as well. Having said that, the majority of people in the world that we are dealing with as stateless are not people who are refugees. People who, through historical events like decolonization, people who may belong to minority groups, people who may have moved decades or even centuries ago, but have never been included in the body of citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to understand that statelessness is a challenge for every country in the world. When we launched this campaign in 2014 for 10 years, which is a very long time to keep active interest in anything, we launched 10 action points that we wanted all states globally to undertake. Anything from signing up to the statelessness conventions, to sharing information about who's stateless on their territory, registering births, providing women the same rights as men in conveying their nationality to their children, to their spouses, and so on and so on. So far, we don't know of any state at all that can check off all 10 of those points.
The current UN Conventions on Statelessness, the most recent, was ratified 60 years ago, designed to prevent countries from making people stateless. And yet, even in Britain, citizens can be deprived of their nationality. And this, of course, can lead to statelessness. Is it time to introduce new legislation in relation to statelessness? Is the current one, is it outdated? Is it fit for purpose? Does it need an overhaul?
I think that's a very important observation. And we need to stay very contemporary with this issue. On this issue, and I worked on statelessness up to 25 years ago, I do think there's been a lot of evolution and progression, certainly in nationality laws around the world. At the same time, there are certain things that define a state, the geography of the territory, the body of citizens. That hasn't evolved very much. And maybe that's an area where we need to see more progression. We have seen that the rights of those who are lawfully present in a state, even those who aren't citizens, those rights have moved forward. So even if you are not a citizen of the country, certain rights that you might have. But the stateless persons tend still to be marginalized from that. For purposes of the convention, the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, perhaps in the wisdom of the drafters, perhaps it was all that could be accomplished at the time, it was really very focused. Mm-hmm. If a child is born, give them your nationality if they'd otherwise be stateless, and they're born on your territory or born to your national. If it's very simple. If every state in the world were to do just that, statelessness would be eradicated in a generation. So I think those sort of two benchmarks or starting points, if you like, they stand true. It's very simple to solve the problem of statelessness in legal terms, and I think the convention still holds true on that point. The child is born, don't let them be stateless. That's still a problem. The convention has two very simple ways of addressing that. Born on your territory, born to your national, give the nationality. If the child is a foundling, that's a kind of old word, if the child is born stateless, give them your nationality.
Your work takes you all around the world, so you've seen the good and you've seen the bad. Are there any shining examples of countries that are doing a good job in counteracting statelessness?
We've had one country say that by 2024 they want to have eradicated statelessness on their territory, and that's Thailand. Of course, they have many who've come from Myanmar in the years past, and they have already granted Thai nationality to over 100,000 people. There are several 100,000 still to go, so it's important that that push continues to be made. We've had, in the first 5 years of the campaign, 20 new accessions to the Statelessness Conventions. Mm-hmm. I think in part, although, as you mentioned, the 1961 Convention was adopted so many decades ago, there was no entity or agency or anyone who was asked to advocate the convention, to explain it, to support states, to give technical legal advice. It wasn't until the late 70s that UNHCR was given a very small role in relation to that specific convention. In all parts of the world, we have seen very positive progress. We've seen states resolve problems of statelessness on their territory. We've seen states sign up to the conventions, and I know that there are a few more that are looking to do that this year. Mm-hmm. We have seen states remove gender discrimination in their nationality law and practice, improve birth registration, grant nationality to children born on their territory who would otherwise be stateless. Each one of the goals outlined in the campaign, action has been taken on. It's a matter of putting all of those pieces of the puzzle together in every state in the world. And that's a big step. That's why we launched a campaign. And that's why we want this year to draw particular focus to the midway point.
At this 3-day event, we have major game-changing individuals here that are just concentrating on statelessness. Everybody is here for the one reason. What's on your wish list?
Having worked on this issue on and off for close to 3 decades now, and looking back to where we were in 1990, for example, my wish list in large part is already accomplished just by listening to the first day. There was really no civil society. There were no NGOs. We never heard the voice of a stateless person interviewed and broadcast for everybody to understand what it means to be stateless. We didn't have states coming forward and volunteering to speak about the challenges faced on their territory. And it was very, very difficult, even when states were almost overnight. Their borders had changed, they were updating their nationality laws and so on. It was very difficult to discuss, to raise awareness. It was thought to be too sensitive. Different attempts have been made over the decades since the Second World War to include statelessness in some of the human rights conventions. And it was always felt it's too far, too great a reach. This is state sovereignty. Mm-hmm. That's not the message I'm hearing today. I'm hearing that there's collaboration. Yes, the state has the ability to give the nationality. It also has responsibilities and accountability in how that's done. I already feel that a great deal has been accomplished and that we have close to 400 participants from around the world, people working in all walks of life. it's remarkable and it's very inspirational. Every single one of those people comes from an individual place with an individual story. That's where I think we can make greater headway, to really discuss with people, understand the communities, understand the places they're from. This isn't about finger pointing and saying this state is bad or that group is bad. No, it's about identifying the problem and bringing solutions together in a collaborative way to say, as a global citizen, we don't want this situation to exist.
Carol Batchelor, we thank you for joining us and sharing with us the incredible work of UNHCR.
Thank you so much.
And thank you at home and online for joining us for another episode of IOHR TV. Please keep up to date on our social media and check out other editions on our website. From myself, Trish Lynch, and the whole team, we'll see you soon. Take care.